Oh, yeah. As high-tech company employees, obviously, we're the first ones to have our technology fail, right?
Here you go. Here you go.
I think the key
And
is
are
being
you?
smart enough to know what technology to turn off so that everything works.
Yeah, that is true. But then we would hear the beeps of your fire alarm in the background. We don't want this on this recording.
Well, that's only because 'cause I'm setting fires, Roland. I'm setting the fires.
I knew it. Arsonist of the Day award. I knew it. Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Wold, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Levinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. Oh my goodness, it's been one heck of a week, and we're going into one heck of a week to come. So, for those who don't know, besides running this, helping run What's Your Baseline, and also being my chief evangelist role at Eris, and also all the other things I do in the industry, I have a music festival that I run every year, and we are about to
Ooh.
go into the busiest time of the year, festival season. So, I think kicking off next week and the week after in Toronto. If you like music, you'll find things at singtoronto.com. It's a little pitch on the side for my other side hustle.
Is there a YouTube live stream that I can watch?
Oh, certainly. Or you can just get on a plane and come to Toronto. Come on, you've been saying you're going to come up
Hmm.
here for a long time. Someday
Hmm.
you gotta have to.
I will. I will. Promised. Promised.
Promises, promises, Roland. But speaking about promises, something that I think about a lot in business is the way that the employer and employee have a relationship, a symbiotic relationship that helps to both get work done and also feel good doing that work, making things mean something. And it's important to me that that connection is strong and that people are being listened to and that they're growing together with their employer. And I got to tell you that that conversation is hard to have. A lot of folks don't understand the components of it, but that's why we brought somebody special on today. So, a good friend of mine and a colleague, I'd like to introduce you and him to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Steve Ponting. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, GM. Thanks, Ron. It's great to be here.
So, Steve, before we get into the meat of the episode, give us a little bit of your bona fides. Like, what sort of qualifications, what sort of experience do you have? What makes you somebody that people should be paying attention to as an authoritative source?
Oh, no one should pay any attention to me.
Perfect. And we're done. No, please continue.
No, I'm just one of those guys with an opinion on everything. And I've been around a bit, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I've lived a life. In fact, I've lived 3 lives. So my first life, I was a salesperson. I helped people to acquire mobile phones. I connected people, and this was back in the day before they were cool. So end of the 90s, early 2000s. I remember when SMS text messaging became a thing, 140 characters, multiple presses. I was there. I was the one. Um, and that age lasted for about 7, 8 years when they became really commoditized. And everybody knew what a mobile phone was and what it could do. And mobile internet had become a thing. The iPhone had been released, which was a complete game changer. And it was time to move on. So that brought him in my second phase, which was supermarket management. Yeah, you didn't see that one coming, did you? No. Managed supermarkets. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was fun. Couple of hundred people, two ends of the spectrum. You had, let's just say, people who were reaching the twilight years, who came to work because they wanted to get away from their significant other or because they wanted to have a bit of social interaction. And at the other end of the spectrum was young guys, young people who just wanted to come out, earn some money, have some fun at the weekend. If you can motivate those two, the people in the middle, they're really easy. So I did that for a few years, and I learned a great deal. One of the things I learned, it's harder than it looks. Really tough. Long hours. Really long hours. And that was why I moved out of that phase. Brought me to era 3, technology era. Pivoted into IT. Pivoted into IT practitioner. It was me crawling under the desks, plugging in cables. Printer jammed. Call me, I'll fix it. Yeah, I was that guy. I was that guy. And that was the transition, the path into software. It was a long journey, 10, 12 years, but I got here. So I have got a combination of technology experience. I've got a combination of people leadership experience, and I've got a combination of sales experience. So you could say I'm in exactly the right role.
Hey, and if you need the right kind of phone, and you need to go to your local ASDA, and you need to understand enterprise technology sales,
I'm
that
the
is
guy.
quite a varied experience.
Yeah. 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 It is. But one of the things I've learned along the way is that whatever it is you're doing, it's all about the people. And that's one of the things that I find really fascinating when we talk about processes and when we talk about architectures of systems. People are at the heart, right? Those processes, that might be, a young person getting their driver's license for the first time, giving them the first taste of freedom, being able to hit the open road. It might be, someone in urgent need of medical care who walks into their accident and emergency department. You know, there's a whole process chain that enables them to be treated and to get well and to go back to their loved ones. So whenever we think about process, we tend to think about these chains of events and sequences of steps, but actually it's so much more impactful than that. And that's what really drives me about this. It's that human interaction with the steps within the chain that delivers what we need.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And by coincidence, we call this episode "Architecture and Emotional Intelligence," um, because, and I think you made the case for it. There is a relationship, right? But before we get to this, I'd like to level set things a little bit, and there might be one or two listeners of our wonderful show who have not heard the term emotional intelligence. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and also draw the connection to why emotional intelligence should be part of the workplace?
Absolutely right. I think you've struck a chord there with me because not enough people know the importance of emotional intelligence or even what it is. So we measure typically cognitive intelligence, which is our ability
Hmm.
to assimilate and analyze
In
information.
3D things in your head. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's really key. That whole logical side of the brain, being able to solve problems, to ideate, to create. But there's another part of us, which is our emotional self, the way that we feel, um, the way that situations and the way that people speak to us impact us. That whole limbic brain, and being self-aware is very, very important in these situations, particularly when you're in a leadership role and people are looking to you for guidance, looking to you for counsel. Being able to not only moderate yourself, to be able to remain calm in tough situations, or to be able to have difficult conversations with people. That's not an easy thing to do. And it takes a level of self awareness to be able to do that. But also being able to read the room, read people's body language, read the emotional responses that people are having to what you're saying or what's going on around them. That's absolutely critical too. If you think about the example I gave of the young person getting their driver's license for the first time, wanting that taste of freedom, as the driving examiner sitting next to them, that what you say at the end of that examination is going to have a big impact on them. To you, it's just another person who sat next to you going out for a drive that you're assessing. But for that person in that moment, that it's all or nothing. They're either going to walk away elated or they're going to walk away broken. And it's having that awareness, understanding that for you, something may be really routine, but for them, it may be a major milestone. That's what emotional intelligence is.
When you really talk about this stuff, Steve, it strikes a chord to me. It's all about what matters to you. I'll give you an example from my perspective. I worked on a project a while ago, about compensation frameworks, and recognizing the utility of different types of compensation, whether or not it be financial, or whether or not it be time off, or different company perks, or recognition or advancement opportunities for growth. Like, people value and they have an emotional connection with certain types of reward, or the relationship that they create between employee and employer, and that's a differential valuation. So you might think, I pay you another $5,000 a year. You will feel recognized. You will feel invested. That could mean nothing to somebody. Whereas getting an extra week off with their family means you understand that I'm a family person, that I'm an adventurer, that this is part of my journey rather than simply a transaction. That's a big difference. And to me, and it sounds like it's what you're saying, Steve, is that more and more it's important that employers have this emotional understanding of what people in their organization need, and not just employers as like a nebulous concept. There's no such thing as an employer as a nebulous. We're just human beings, right? That exist in a legal entity to collect them together. But the human beings having an emotional connection with the people in their team makes a big difference on those people's ability to deliver. And so, specifically, talk to me about where this factors in at strategy level. So, emotional intelligence, where does it find itself situated? Like, who cares about this, and why should they care, particularly as they're trying to build and roll out a strategy?
Mhm. So you would think because it's talking about humans, it's talking about people, that it would automatically sit within HR, human resources, human capital management. But
Sure.
it doesn't. It sits with everyone. All
Hmm.
leaders really have a responsibility. Um, I'm a quite a prolific LinkedIn poster. I'm sure you know that, Roland. I'm sure you know that, JM. You've seen it. You've seen the content. And as I was scrolling through, I saw something that really struck me, which was just a simple graphic. And all it said is, your boss has a bigger impact on your mental health than anything else. And it's so true. We spend so much of our lives working, spending time with people who we may not have a connection with. We may not have a relationship with outside of the construct of work. So understanding one another, knowing what motivates, you were talking about compensation there as a form of motivation. Knowing what motivates people is absolutely critical, more so than ever when you're embarking on a transformation journey. If there's anything that you want to change within your organization, not necessarily at a strategic level, but very importantly at a strategic level, you have to understand the human aspect of that change, because people react to change very differently. Some people embrace change. Some people see change as opportunity, which it so often is. But others recoil from change. They like the status quo. They like the comfort that the status quo gives them. They know they go to work in the morning. They know exactly what to expect. They know exactly how to do their job. And that's all they want to do. Turn up, do what's needed, go home. Others relish the challenge that change presents. But you have to understand that. And so when you're going through transformation as a leader, you're thinking about what you're changing from a business perspective, as in the functional changes, the the manner in which work gets done. You're thinking about the technology that's underpinning that, that's supporting that. But you should also be thinking about the people. How are they going to react to it? So how are you going to communicate the change, first of all? Okay. Are you just going to say, right, from tomorrow, we're doing it this way with no explanation of why? Well, you can do, and for the most part, it will work. But if you really want to transform your organization, you've got to bring people with you. You've got to take them on the journey. So explain why the change is necessary. Explain what the
Or
change means for them.
yeah, or I just say, you're all fired. I'm replacing you with AI agents, which I see, speaking of the LinkedIn bubble, which I see a more organizations than ever proposing this.
Hmm.
To say, oh, look at what you can save, look at what you pay your people, and they're not reliable and whatever, right? They're pricey and whatnot. Just replace them with the latest and greatest AI, and we go for it. Examples where things like Shopify, right, who make it mandatory to use AI, and people get graded, evaluated on their usage. Or think about the US government, who just posted and said, no, we're an AI first organization. Everything we do needs to be AI first. And I'm just wondering, and I hope you can enlighten me. I'm just wondering if the whole emotional intelligence thing just can go out the window, because if you don't have people, You don't have to care about this. So what is your opinion when you think about this? What is the and we're still talking strategy, and ideation, and where do I want to go and all those things. Where are you on that, I don't know, spectrum, if you will, from no, 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 we need to take care of the people versus I don't need people at all, right? And replace them with technology. What is your opinion on that?
I think it depends what you want to achieve as a business ultimately. If you're thinking about purely bottom line, it's all about the
Hmm.
margin, it's all about making as much profit as you possibly can, then sure, automation looks really attractive, right? You strip out one of your huge fixed costs, which is the squidgy, fleshy bit that walks through the door every morning and leaves every evening. With, you may call it agentic AI, you may call it RPA, robotic process automation, some form of automation. But what you have to realize is, first of all, someone has to manage and maintain that. Someone has to design that system. Someone has to handle the exceptions. So there will always be people. And is it better to have a workforce that are motivated, that are engaged, that are fully signed on to what you're trying to do, your mission as an organization? Or is it better to have a workforce that just show up because they need the paycheck?
Well,
Which would you prefer?
yeah, I'm thinking about your example of you managing the supermarket, right? When I think a little bit fast forward, of your 100 people in your supermarket, I don't know how many filled the shelves and cashed in the money and all that type of stuff, right? But
Mhm.
I would assume it's a significant amount of those 100 people, right? So you would take out a big chunk of those jobs, right? Replace them with some form of automation, and you would bring in different people. Like you said, people who design things, people who do the exceptions, so specialists, and whatnot. So you change the character of your organization. And then I'm wondering, well, what happens with all those guys that you have let go? So does an organization have a responsibility for their people? And in my observation, many organizations would say no, right? And that's different than 20, 30 years ago.
I Unfortunately, I think you're absolutely right, Roland. If you look at the mass layoffs that we've seen within the tech
Hmm.
sector over the last decade, it sends a very strong signal that people are consumable items. We're a commodity ultimately. Um, but what you have to think about is, actually, we're not a commodity. We're an asset. People are an asset to an organization. And I don't just mean that an asset as in they have a pound note or a dollar value associated with them, but they're an asset because every single person who has worked within an organization, one, has a level of understanding and knowledge of how that business operates. And when you let that person go, that knowledge goes with them. The second thing is, as well, is they bring their own creativity. They bring their own personality to the organization when they come to work. And that person will find the right way of doing what is needed of them. And again, if you decide that that person is no longer needed in the organization, that knowledge, that creativity walks out the door. And that will have to be replaced. That utility has to be replaced somewhat through some mechanism, whether it be through automation or whether it be through an expansion of someone else's role to fill the gap that's left behind. And that costs. There is a productivity loss from that person having to ramp up. There's a cost of change of that person having to take on new responsibilities, new activities within their role. Or if you're bringing in software as a bot or as a agentic AI to replace that person, there's a training period. There's the setup, the enablement, the deployment, all of the testing sequences that have to be carried out. There's a cost associated with that. So you have to think about this. And yeah, unfortunately, there will be people that you can't always bring with you on the journey. There will be a skills mismatch. There will be a cognitive mismatch. Some people just will not have the required skill set or the required level of intelligence to be able to take the step up. But you have to find the balance. And I think that's, for me, the critical point. You talked about Shopify as a great example of putting a mandate in place to use AI. AI is a fantastic way of augmenting the human aspect of work. If you're putting someone into a creative role, let them use AI to spark that creativity. Rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper, they can start with some seeding ideas, which they can then, fill out. That's the type of thing that AI should be doing. It should be augmenting us. It should be helping us to become better at what we do.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the emotion part of all this as well, because I think about a lot of this automation and a lot of the workforce augmentation as potentially losing some of that connection with customer. People are buying your products and services. People are engaging with your company, not just robots. So having robots sell to robots makes sense. So having automation sell to automation, but connecting in with the customer's journeys and stories with their needs and their feelings and sentiments about this, I feel like when you ignore emotion as a part of the corporate experience, you ignore the humanity as part of the buyer experience and journey. Tell me a little bit more about what the value loss is when you take that out of the equation.
Jem, you've hit an absolute golden nugget there. I think if you take the quote from Richard Branson, which is "Look after your people, and your people will look after your customer." I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said, and it's so true. And this is where having that emotionally intelligent leadership within an organization makes such a big difference. Roland, I'll come back to your point about the AI augmented supermarket. Okay, for the most part, you would think as a customer, it's a fantastic experience. You walk through the door, the shelves are fully stocked. You walk up to the self checkout, you're able to scan your items, walk out the door. It's a very fluid, very fulfilling customer experience if you're comfortable with that. But what about the marginalized elements of the customer base? Those who are less technically savvy, for example, who walk in and see a self-scan checkout not as a way of speeding them to their endpoint, i.e., being able to more quickly complete the transaction and leave, but actually is something which is quite threatening, quite intimidating. So for them, a checkout that has a person behind it that they can talk to, that they can interact with, that's what they see as their optimum customer experience. For some people, going to the store to buy their goods and groceries may be one of their few human interactions in their week. They may look forward to going to the store to have a chat with the person who's behind the till. But this is where emotional intelligence is so strikingly important. I'll give you an example of this. You imagine the scenario. You walk into your store, you've got 5 or 6 items that you want to buy, and you're in a hurry to get home. You've got a hungry family at home. You've got a young child who's screaming because they're waiting for their dinner. And in front of you is your typical, old lady who's come to the store. She wants to do her shopping. She wants to have a chat at the same time. So for her, she's being fulfilled by that engagement. But for the person behind, it's frustrating. So as the checkout operator, you've got to think, okay, I need to give this person what they need. I need to be able to have a level of conversation, but at the same time, I have to be really mindful that I've got a queue of customers who also just want to buy their stuff and get gone. So that's why this whole topic of emotional intelligence is so important, particularly within a setting where you have both machine automation, because it's very fast, it's very efficient, but also the need for a slower paced, more considered, more human engagement.
And I think that we're looking all for this human engagement both with our employer and with our customers. And I think this leads us to a perfect opportunity to reflect on these sorts of things with our audience, one of the other types of humans that we interact with. And so, folks out there in podcast land, think about your emotional experience of being a customer and of being an employee as part of change and transformation. How has emotional intelligence played into your experience as an employee or as a customer? Where have you made different sorts of decisions? Maybe going to a different provider or moving companies as a result of failures to respect the emotional intelligence and the emotional needs of you as a customer or an employee. And how would you have liked to see things done differently to provide you with a sense of satisfaction you're looking to get? We'll leave you for a moment to think about that and come back with our second section, the how.
And welcome back. Hey, Steve, this is a very interesting conversation, and we also had a little side conversation during the break. So I hope we don't have to repeat it. But uh, let's take a step back from the AI topic and what impact that might have. Let's talk a little bit about more emotional intelligence, because I think you convinced me that this is a thing. Right. So that's the first thing. Uh, I think you convinced me about the usefulness. Good, you know. Um, I think I hear between the lines what the impact for architecture and process management and all that type of stuff is. JM's example with the customer experience. But how do I recognize if you or I or even JM has emotional intelligence? Because it's obviously not measurable, and I'm aiming towards the cognitive test that we spoke about,
Mhm.
I don't know, 20 minutes ago.
Wait,
So how
is
do
it
you
not
recognize it?
measurable? Like, one
I don't
second.
know.
But
Is
before
it?
we go, but before that premise goes off, is it recognizable or not recognizable?
I would argue it's recognizable and measurable. It's just measured in
Oh,
a different manner. If you think about the psychometric tests, which all of us will be familiar with, um, ultimately that's what they're measuring. It's not a measure of cognitive intelligence, it's a measure of emotional intelligence. It's analysis of your personality and how you respond in certain situations. And the manner in which you respond in those contrived situations as part of the psychometric test is a measure of your emotional intelligence, how self-aware you are, and also how you are able to understand emotional intelligence within others. Empathy, for example, is a great measure. Do you see your counterpart in a conversation or within a meeting or within an engagement as showing empathy? Do they demonstrate good active listening skills? Are they making all the right noises? Are they giving you the right uh, body language feedback in the way that JM does? You see JM's quite animated when you're talking. His head's nodding. He's doing the finger. Um, he's showing that he's listening. He's engaging with you as you speak. That's a
so
sign of someone who's got emotional intelligence.
I don't know if I buy this, Steve, to be quite honest,
He doesn't.
because
He doesn't buy that. I have emotional intelligence. That's what I'm hearing.
Ah,
yeah, oh, I don't buy that either, JM. So don't sweat that. But no, in all seriousness, I don't think that when you have a test like a Myers-Briggs, and you get your profile and you get that magic 4-character result and everybody's the greatest. I don't think that you measure this. What I'm thinking is things like the method of assessment center. I don't know if you've ever been through this. It's a very fascinating way of selecting people, because what you do is you uh, look for behaviors. You have observers, and then the observers change and they stick their heads together and say, "Oh, that Steve dude, he did this well and this he didn't. And how do we rate him and whatnot?" I found that very much interesting, and I can see this. So, and I don't know, don't want to go too far. That was a method that was invented by the German Reichswehr way back when to select their officers. right? And the German armed forces still does that with their officer candidates. You play a round of basketball, right? And it's so fun to see. Are there people who like to trick the observers by, oh, I'm so altruistic. Here's my ball. I don't want to jump to the hoop, or do you have the people who say, no, we must win and whatnot. So I found that very, very interesting to see. So, and now I navigated myself into a big hole and I can't get out of this anymore,
Let
Steve.
me help
Help
you
me a
out there,
little bit.
Roland.
Thank
Here's
you.
a question really, is if we're looking to measure emotional intelligence, and we
Yeah.
can get a sense of people who have more awareness or less awareness, what do we do about it? Like, how do we accommodate for different levels of emotional intelligence? Where do we situate people and how do we coach them?
That's the key point. That whole coaching mechanism, that's so powerful because not only does it give you insight into whether that person has emotional intelligence because of the way that they interact during coaching, but if they are emotionally intelligent, you can run with it. You can help them to develop that. And if they're not, then you can use more structured techniques to help them, to equip them with that emotional intelligence. You can start them on that journey. I these are skills and concepts that I've learned over the last 20 plus years of people management, people leadership. This isn't coming out of a textbook necessarily. Yes, I've gone through cultural training, I've gone through agile leadership training and things like where I've learned discrete skills, but it's putting those skills together and blending them with your experience that gives you the level of emotional intelligence. And remember, it's not just about me. It's not just about my own self-awareness, but it's about being able to read it in others.
So how do you do that? Because if I'm a prick who doesn't care about others, right? Um,
Mhm. As an
you
example.
just give you an example. So
Hmm.
you, Steve, as the leader, you have two choices, right? The first choice is to say, oh, that Roland guy, get him out of here. He will never change, right? The other one is you declare Roland as your project, you know, and I want to hone in on that. So, assuming you would say, okay, hey, there is this guy who doesn't care about others, right? But he has some potential. How do you teach? How do you bring that Roland guy from being a antisocial, egomaniac, whatever person to somebody who develops an EQ so that he can relate to others? How do you do that?
Well, I would take that back a step and ask, do you need to? Because I think there was a third option there. The first option
Oh,
was kick Roland out the door. The second
yeah.
option was make Roland my project. The
Uh-huh.
third option is give Roland what he needs within his role. So if I know that Roland is a very egotistical, self-centered person who doesn't care about others, yeah, put him in a role where he allows himself to achieve through his own individual contributions, where interaction with others, dependencies on others is either not necessary or a very minor component of his role. So, and again, that's where having that level of emotional intelligence is so critical to be able to read that in Roland as the character and be able to
Mhm.
understand what that person needs from their role in order to be engaged, but also successful and motivated.
Yeah. But think about the situation. Say, which would be great. Roland gets paid so much, that
Mm.
we can't afford him to put him on his little lighthouse and let him flick the switch, twice a day, and not talk to anyone and be the hermit. Um, so you declare Roland your little project.
Hmm.
What would you do? How would you approach that situation?
So the first thing I would need to do is understand what makes Roland tick.
Hmm.
What does he care about? What is he interested in? What motivates him? Because we started the conversation earlier. We were talking about compensation. and how not every dollar is equal in terms of compensation. For some people, it's really meaningful and really motivating. And for others,
Mhm,
actually,
mhm.
another form of compensation is more interesting. So what motivates Roland? Why does Roland come to work? Is it just to get the paycheck and go home at the end of the day? Is it to get a feeling of self-importance? What is it? What makes him tick? Once you've got that understanding, you've got a series of levers that you can then work with. You can then start to understand, okay, how can I bring Roland with me on this journey? What can I do that feeds into those motivational items? I build that into this plan to bring Roland out of himself and to make Roland much more self-aware and also able to engage with and work with others in the way that we want him to. So that would be a starting point.
But what does a working organization full of those kind of people look like? Like, how is it more effective? How is it better to work at? How do you deliver better on your architecture and process driven promises if this is done right?
That's a really great question. And ultimately, what it comes down to is how engaged your employee base is. So, how invested are they in what they do? Because people who are invested in it, who are more motivated by what they do and why they do it, are more productive. They're happier, and that means happiness, right, is a great way of saving money. And I mean that you can actually put a dollar amount on happiness because people who are happy and people who are motivated and engaged in what they do, uh, they are prepared to go the extra mile. Not only are they prepared to stay late because they want to, and in fact, I've had people work for me where I've had to, tell them to go home. I've had to tell them to stop working on weekends. I've had to tell them to, switch their phones off because they are really bought into what they do and they genuinely love it. But also, you've got that absenteeism. So people who are motivated and happy, not only are they more productive, but they're less likely to take time off sick.
Yeah,
So
also quiet quitting and things like that.
yeah,
Like those,
exactly.
it's like there's an epidemic of that going on, particularly among people who I think the younger generation who feel disenfranchised and they're not engaged with the capitalism of the time. There's a lots of things we can talk about with that, but man, I worry about that.
I don't think it's age related. I've seen that in all ages, where people just quit and they make a happy face and whatever. When you see the back channel conversations, if you have the chance to see it, you see it's a human treat. It's not that it's age dependent. Some people might be more outspoken about that than others, but I think it's a human thing.
It absolutely is. And it comes down to two critical points within an organization, which is purpose and a sense of belonging. If someone feels purpose, if they feel like they're being useful and they can understand how what they do on a day-to-day basis ties into, top level corporate objectives, then that's where that sense of engagement comes from. If they feel like they belong to a cohort, if there's camaraderie, a sense of team within their environment, then they they automatically won't want to let their teammates down. They'll want to pull together and move forward as one.
I'm gonna put your feet to the fire here a little bit, Steve, because the thing that I really struggle with, and I think a lot of organizations struggle with, is how in the world to measure that. So what are some KPIs that you've seen organizations successfully like put their finger on the pulse of to get a good sense of purpose and belonging? Because otherwise it feels like this is just it can be viewed as wishy-washy. Even though we
Mhm.
know it creates value, it's hard to show that it's that we're moving the needle and that there's correlation between that moving of the emotional needle and the outcomes for the business.
So you're absolutely right, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to monitor and to measure from a KPI perspective. But you mentioned one earlier on, which is absenteeism. So that's a very easy way of measuring how engaged your employee base is. Second one is how well they engage in activity. So, for example, everybody loves the annual corporate um, feedback survey.
Performance review.
Well, performance reviews can play a part, but that wasn't what I was thinking about. I was
Uh-huh.
thinking about, the annual corporate survey that goes out that tries to measure the happiness and the engagement within the team. But actually, there's the secret sauce in that, which is not in the responses themselves, but in the number of responses.
Yeah, yeah. When you see the manager sending out the notes like, "Hey guys, it's just a 20% participation. I want 99% of our team showing up as, we respond." It's like, okay, fill out the damn forms yourself, and submit them,
I hate
Yeah,
the one where you see,
right?
like, the response rate of, like, emails opened percentage, like, 80% of the email was opened. Okay, great. And 20% response. Like, so everyone opened it and went, "Screw this. I don't care."
Yeah,
That's a
exactly.
yeah.
really good
They
point.
don't care. And that is a really great KPI because you want people to care. But that's a double-edged sword because they either care because they're invested in it, they're emotionally invested in what they do and they want it to get better, or worse, and this is the one you don't want, they respond because they're enraged, because they know that change has to happen. But either way, you know how your employee base is feeling.
I think there's another aspect of that, and I just threw it in whatever 5 minutes ago, right? I think it's the feeling, the actual degree of autonomy that somebody has. Oh, I'm working here. It feels like crap. I can't do anything anyways. So why should I care? You know. Oh yeah, the bigwigs make the big money, right? They don't care about my opinion. So I just hunker down, do my job, do the best that I don't get fired, and move on. And oh, by the way, I have that little hobby of whatever, fly fishing, and that's the purpose of my life, So I'm living for the weekend to go and stand in a river. You know what I mean? So I think
Yeah, I do.
autonomy is the big key here, because you need to recognize it, but then you need to give people the opportunity to do something with it. And you as a leader must have the strength, in lack of a better term, to live with what the employee, that JM, that troublemaker guy, he has that silly idea again, but I let him do that, right? Because sometimes he has some good ideas and something good comes out of it. So I give JM the autonomy to improve things, right? Because I want to keep him.
Mhm.
See, that's why I have him on the podcast for over 90 episodes now.
But that's your conscious decision. And you do that
Oh,
because you
sure.
understand the utility of JM. You know what he brings to the
Oh,
party. You said he brings some great
yeah.
ideas occasionally.
Yeah,
I'm right here,
sometimes.
guys. I'm right here. What are you doing?
JM, you just work here for no pay.
But also, like, let's talk about the way a team or an organization feels when this is well implemented. Like, maybe let's turn around and talk about Nirvana. And Steve, if you want to look at the, like, what is an organization that this is high functioning, emotionally aware, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And most importantly, like, what is it effective at doing?
So I think there's two elements to this. A high functioning, emotionally intelligent organization is highly productive, for one, and that is something that you can easily measure. Revenue per capita is a great measure for that. Um, the return on human capital, there's a whole metric around that. Um, but also it comes down to your customer experience as well. High NPS is a great reflection on the quality of service that a customer is achieving. And a customer is going to experience good quality service from people who are actively engaged and emotionally invested in what they do. And this is why getting that blend of AI and automation with the human emotional aspect is so important. So important.
Yeah. So I don't know. I try to. And we're getting to the top of the hour, unfortunately, because it's a very interesting conversation that we should have continue with a bowl of milk at some point in time. But I try to close the loop. You know, you explained how good organization could look like, I said, well, people don't care. They just build AI bots, you know. I would love you to give us a perspective into the future. Where do you see the ship going? You know, if you had your brothers and you would rule the world and you could have your objective perspective on what
Mhm.
any organization does, where do you see the pendulum swinging? To which side of the two options?
So I think what you would see is there will be two things. One, automation is here to stay and it's only going to grow. More and
Mhm.
more aspects of people's daily lives will become automated, but they'll become automated in a positive way. We'll take away the mundane, the repetitive, the the tasks which don't require high levels of cognitive load. You know, the simple tasks that can be really frustrating. What we will see then is people applying themselves more to the work that gets done, you know, bringing more of themselves to work, investing in the output that they are creating. And that will lead to people who are more engaged. It will lead to higher levels of productivity, yes, but also it will lead to a more rounded organization because people will be able to focus on the aspects of the roles which they can uniquely contribute to. And this is why, coming back to the topic of this podcast, you know, getting that understanding of where people are important and where people can add more value within a process is so critical for an organization. You know, when you're looking at automation, yes, you want to look for the great candidates for automation, but on the flip side, you want to look at great candidates for human elements to be brought into the process. Now, I'll give you an example. If you're working for an insurance company, you're looking at ways of improving your claims management process, as so many insurance companies are. What do you want your initial touch point to be within a claim? You know, imagine the scenario. You're a young driver. You've just passed your test. You're out for one of your first solo drives on the road. You have a car accident. Right? Horrible situation to find yourself in. The last thing you want as that person is to be phoning your insurance company and to have a soulless robotic voice on the end of the phone saying, "Would you like to submit a claim?" No, you want to speak to a person. You want to speak to someone who can feel what you're feeling in the moment. You know, that whole scared, concerned, anxious, frightened person, not press 3 after the tone. That's not helping anybody.
The worst thing, though, for me is also connecting with an apathetic person. It's a role you failed to automate and a person you failed to connect with.
Mhm.
And I think that really brings us to the conclusion of this episode, which is that you're trying to build a practice that is enabling your organization to succeed and your customers and your services to be well received. And that's the idea behind understanding by about listening, about building with emotion in mind. And I suspect our audience has had experiences where that's worked well, but also where that's worked poorly. So now turn to your own nirvana. What do you want to see from your organization? How do you want to feel connected? How do you want to see emotion an acknowledged and respected part of workplace life, about solutions deployment, about practice building, about supporting your customers, and ultimately about creating a positive and supportive working environment within which you can excel? We'll leave you for a moment and come back with our final thoughts and conclusions for the episode.
I won't come, something coming over. I won't come like something coming over me. I won't come like something coming over me. I won't come like something coming over me. Something coming over.
And welcome back. Hey, Steve, very, very, very interesting conversation. And again, I will pick up my idea of sharing a bowl of milk with you for a future conversation because it's really interesting topic. Um, I'm pretty sure that a lot of our listeners and watchers will have the same feeling. So the question is, well, how can people reach you?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Well, we will be happy to put your URL in the show notes. And with that, JM, I think you have something to say about the show notes for this wonderful episode, don't you?
This outro is a wonderful mess, my friend. But that's the thing, is we're having fun. Yes. If you want to see the show notes, you can go to whatsyourbaseline.com. This episode specifically, whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 92. I know we're closing in on 100. But this is the big thank you to everyone who's coming along with us. We just passed 50,000 views, which is incredible. My goodness. Thank you. We've had a lot of fun recording and getting great feedback from our audience. If you haven't given us feedback, what do you know? You're not complaining about us? Come on in. So if you're not giving us feedback, you're missing out on an opportunity to throw a little shade our way and help us to figure out what the next way of doing things should be. But I'd love to hear from everybody. Have a great time. Thank you for coming along on this episode. And until the next one, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
I've been Steve Ponting.
And my name is Roland Volt.
And we will see you in the next one.